Hey everyone! Today in this video I'm going to be going over exactly how I make my Total Drama character redesigns. You can also use this process to design your own characters. To make these I use Krita, a free and open source software which I'll link in the description. You can certainly use other programs as well, but this one works just fine for me. So to start, this canvas is 4000 by 6000 pixels. I recommend a high resolution so you'll have sharp lines. You could use a vector program like Illustrator to do this and ignore the resolution, but with a raster image this big, you won't really have problems with it being too small for usage. This scale might make your file sizes pretty large though, so if space is a concern, you may want to scale this down. So I've got a pose of Wayne here, and you can find these on the Total Drama wiki. I'll link where you can find a lot of them below as well. Make sure you pick a high enough quality one, because working with a really low resolution one is going to be much more annoying than not doing that. So to start right here, I have 3 layers, one for the background, one for Wayne's pose, and one for the lines I'll be drawing. You'll want to add at least another one for sketching, which I'll end up doing later. First, I put Wayne at about 50% opacity so I can see the black lines I'll be using to trace him. Then I lower my brush size to 3. It's nice to have a small brush size to get your lines nice and crisp. Next, I start by using the line tool to trace the straight lines on Wayne's hat. Using 2 lines to trace will get you much closer to the show's style, as the line art isn't even in its thickness and there's a lot of sharp corners. Tracing this with a normal brush tool won't get you the same result if you just use it with a full thickness equivalent to what the lines should be. Obviously the line tool won't work for the curves, and that's when I use the Bézier curve tool. You'll want to start at one corner and pick a point down the line to create the curve. If you try to make the curve from the start to end in one line, it might work, but the nature of the tool means you might have to make corrections, so doing it in segments often works the best for me. This tool also allows you to continue after you define the first segment of the curve, so that's what I do to finish that curve. I line it up and it goes past where I need to go, but that's fine. I can just erase it later. It often takes me more than one attempt to get it right, as you can see here. The goal is to line it up as closely as possible to the actual line. I'll add another curve if I see it doesn't line up perfectly, and it's an easy fix. This is the basic process that I repeat throughout the entire thing. You want to follow straight lines all the way through, as doing half, then continuing from the middle might result in it not looking perfectly straight. Also, we'll worry about the colored lines that are being used in the show's new style later. I like to fill in the sections as I go just to feel a sense of progression, but that choice is up to you whether to do that now or later. A tip for when you're using the fill tool is to set it to grow the fill by 2 pixels, and you want to put the threshold to about 30 or more. This will help fill in the lines fully, which is something I forgot to do, so I had to go back and fix a couple spots. It's all about manipulating the curve tool correctly. This may not be the fastest process, but it gets the style pretty accurate, and this redesign in total took me about 2 hours. Next, when it comes to this curve, Wayne's ear blocks part of it, so I create a new layer to draw the curve on. This lets me draw the line without worrying about overlapping with the other lines. I erase the overlap and then merge the layer with my original line layer. Now we're getting to the part where I'm actually changing things. I create a new layer for the lines of Wayne's body to be separate from his head, then I finally get to actually naming all of my layers. I'm using other characters like Jeff and Alejandro for reference for Wayne's shirt, and that is a valuable tool to make use of. The best way to make something in the show's style is to copy it. It's time for our sketch, which you should have made from the beginning, but I'm doing now since nothing changed about his head. Having a basis for what you want to create is important. You can see me making his open shirt and keeping the sketch rough, as we'll be continuing our lines over it later. Make sure you're happy with the shapes you're drawing, as you see me adjusting his sleeves multiple times to make sure of that. When working on the arms, I had to think about what they looked like underneath the sleeves, as Wayne wears his really bulky hockey jersey. I used the eraser tool to adjust, and later the polygonal selection tool to make his shirt color larger. You can also use different colors to keep things clear within your sketch as well. I won't be changing much about his legs, so the sketch ends there for me. I lower its opacity and start working on the process of creating the shapes. There's more guesstimating involved in this process since you're not directly tracing, but that means you have more leeway. Utilize the transform tool to flip your shapes horizontally to save yourself time and keep things consistent, as I do that with the collar. Then, as earlier, it's more lines and curves. I ended up making his arm, but it didn't look right, so I adjusted its width and gave him actual elbows. The curves were pretty tricky on this part, so it took me a while. From here on, it's just a lot of following the sketch and creating the lines. I took his left arm and flipped it to work as his right arm and used the new layer trick to make his hand. Once you get your lines done, go back in to make sure your line thickness looks good and adjust if needed. The next step after was his pants and legs, which uses the exact same process as the head, so I'm skipping ahead. Now, we finished all the black lines, except his face, we'll do that later, and it's time to start on the colored lines. I make a new layer and copy original Wayne over and put him off to the side so I can use the color picker to snag the colors of the lines. I make another layer called colored lines that sits below the other line layers. Simple filling in as usual. And then we're on to the boots, where I use the circle tool, which comes in handy for the circles on his shoes. Make sure to change the pen size for this. Then I flip them and copy them across. After the rest of the lines, it's time to fill in his face. Curves and lines, as usual. Use the circle tool on a new layer for the eyes, and then the transform tool to adjust them to fit properly. Cut off the tops and merge them back down. Now we're on to coloring in. What I do here is hide all the non-line art layers and then create a new layer from the visible ones, which makes a combined layer of all the line art. I put it beneath the other line art layers and then begin grabbing colors to fill in. After getting to his shirt, I added more colored lines on his folded up sleeves, like Jeff's shirt. When it comes to his eyes themselves, I just increased the brush size to make 2 circles. Sometimes Total Drama characters' eyes aren't perfectly circular, and then you'll have to mess around with the circle tool or the curve tool. I eventually come back to the shirt, changing it to orange, meaning I need to redo my colored lines. Then I use reference to create a flower for his Hawaiian shirt. I duplicate it across and change its size to fill in the space, and then fill in their centers. Finally, it's necklace time, and I use original Wayne's jersey for reference. I tilt the owl slightly and then start to trace it. I'm using multiple layers here, so keep an eye on them. It's usually me adding layers below the lines to fill them in and then merging back together. Finally, I add a few more details before remembering I want to shorten his neck, so I take the entire image to a new document to do that by hand since I forgot to do it earlier. And with that, we have our finished product. Hopefully you found this tutorial useful, or at least pretty cool. If you did, or even if you didn't, I'd really appreciate if you subscribed to the channel. Feel free to join my Discord server linked below, and thank you for watching.